Greetings again. Well, I'm going to get this is the next chapter of our reading time. I'm Clifford Bates. I've been your guide here reading Machiavelli, his Prince. Today, right now, we're going to be doing chapter 9, which is the Civic Principate. In the last chapter, we did the discussion of achieving the prince through wickedness. And he said that, and in fact, he introduces that chapter with saying, well, we've done everything I've discussed earlier. Now I'm going to add two more things, and the things I didn't mention before. That is something that should be left to republics, which this is what this is, and then wickedness. Now, and we in the last chapter, in chapter 8, he dealt with achieving through wickedness, and he gave two examples. Now he's going to talk about the Civic Republic, which is when your fellow citizens make you the prince. Okay, in other words, this is the idea that the citizens elect you to be the head. Now we could argue maybe this is what democratic governments are, right? Or this is what Republican governments that have a chief executive, and that the prince is the chief executive, right? This is why Harvey Mansfield, in this classic book on taming the prince, points out is that the modern executive is kind of the modern executive in the democratic framework as embraced by, let's say, the Federalist Papers, and even Montesquieu in the Spirit of the Laws is kind of the taming of the prince, the making the prince fit in a democratic or Republican framework. But here we are going to be looking at this chapter today, and right now, again, we're using I'm using the Leopold de Alvarez translation. There's a link below about it. Again, this is the one I prefer because it's the one I know. I know many. I actually have read lots of translations of the Prince. I have I have most of the major translations. I think I maybe have all the major English translations of it. No, of the past 40 years, yes, 50 years. I have some older ones too, which are usually junky. The older public accessible ones usually, and they're more paraphrases than translations. What the Alvarez does is try to catch the literal text, and actually he even keeps the structure of the text. The paragraphing structure and the choices of paragraphs, again, it's following the actual Italian. So therefore, this is why, some translators break up more. His paragraphs are rather long, and he wants to be as true to the Italian text as he can, including the style of the sentences. And this is why it's very awkward in English in that sense. And some people don't like that because of that. But I think this gives us a sense of the text in that sense. So on the Civic Principate, chapter 9 has seven paragraphs. The first one, let's start into it. But coming to the other part, when a private citizen, neither by wickedness nor other intolerable violence, but with the favor of his fellow citizens, becomes prince of the patria, his fatherland, which one can call a civic principate, nor is it necessary to attain it either wholly through virtue or wholly through fortune, but more nearly through a fortunate attunedness, I say that the one ascends to this principate either with the favor of the people or with that of the great. In other words, either get to this of the people or the great. Now, let's stop here for a second. He says what? This is, in other words, you get this. This is a case of neither by virtue or by fortune, but rather a fortunate attunedness. In other words, attunedness to either two means. You can either become in through the people or through the great, and therefore the attunedness is your ability to getting the support of one of these two humors, in that sense, the humors of the Republic, of this, using Aristotle's term. the humors of the city. Now, this is what it means. This is the republic. A republic either has these two humors, and one of these is going to be the ruling humor. Either the people are ruling, and this is a popular rule. This is democratic rule, or it's going to have the great, and this is oligarchy aristocratic rule. So it's this tension between the people and the great, the people and the great. This is a fundamental tension of classical and particularly Republican politics. And by Republican means that of a republic. Okay. Now he continues here. For every city, these two humors, again, this Machiavelli says, and Aristotle created this language, two humors are to be found, either the people or the great. And it comes of this, that the people desire not to be commanded or oppressed by the great, and the great desire to command and oppress the people, semicolon. And from these two different appetites, one of three effects issues in the cities, either a principate, liberty, or license. Now, what is this? Two things. These are the pre-effects: a principate, liberty, or license. License is when everyone does what they want. Okay. Now, is it the people doing what they want, or like this? Liberty is when there's order to it. In other words, liberty and license, he just left it. A principate, liberty, and license. Liberty means that there's some kind of, I think there's an order to it. There's an orderly order. Then it's ruled either by the great or by the people, and that there's kind of an order. The question is, we have to be careful here. Remember, what do the people want? They want to be left alone, he says. They have the desire, in other words, they have the desire not to be commanded or oppressed by the great. And the great has what? The desire to command and oppress, has desire to oppress the people. So therefore that ends the first paragraph. There's this thing, the humors. The humors are the humors of the great, which want to do what? They have an appetite. That great wants to do things. They want to accomplish, and this requires the people to obey. And therefore they command them, and they will compel them, right, to do what they want to do. And then the people just want to be left alone. Okay, the Principate is established either by the people or by the great, according to whatever one or the other of these parties has the occasion. For the great, when they see they are not able to resist the people, turning to the reputation of one of their own, making him a prince, so that they, under his shadow, give vent to their appetite. Ending sentence. In other words, they want this power. They want his power and his position to be able to vent their appetite. So therefore, clearly, his idea of license is that when the great are ruling, in other words, when the great get to do their appetite, they get to enjoy this. They vent their appetite. The people also, when they see that they're not able to resist the great, turn to the reputation of one who has and make him a prince, in order to defend, to be defended with his authority. In other words, see the different motive here. The people will turn to the great to be protected against the. Now Machiavelli seems to suggest that the great, the notables, in Aristotle language is the notables, right? The notables. These people, for Aristotle, the notables. See, the difference is Aristotle has the notables. Well, but he's, Book 11, Politics of Book 4, Chapter 11 and Book 4, he gives an equally. In other words, the very wealthy, they're so used to just getting their way, they make everyone a servant, and they treat them like in this way. So in many ways, Machiavelli and Aristotle are kind of agreement here about this, that the great or the very wealthy, Aristotle, it's the very wealthy, they have the tendency, because they're so used to so used to their status and everything is available to them, and never having to submit to authority, they get their way all the time, simply just command and tell people below them what to do and how to do. whereas the many just simply just want to be left alone. Okay, so therefore there is that aspect of this. In other words, and he who comes to the Principate with the aid of the great maintains himself with more difficulty than the one who attains it with the aid of the people. For he finds himself a prince with many around him who opine themselves as equal, and because of this he cannot command or manage them in his own mode. In other words, if the great make you a prince, the problem is they think they're great also. They're great. And all these great people around who made you a prince, you're more their servant than, in other words, you're more their servant than you are their boss. In other words, they either think you're an equal or they treat you like they're beneath them. Okay. In other words, and therefore you can't command them in the same way. You're not able to deal with them, and they feel that they're their equal, and that's why the prince cannot command them or manage them in his own mode. That's how the paragraph ends. Now we go to the third paragraph. But he who arrives at the Principate with the popular flavor finds himself alone, and there will be no one or very few around him who are not prepared to obey. Okay, period. In other words, there's going to be most will obey. There's going to be no one who's equal. If they are, there's so few, and that therefore they're more likely to obey. Now he continues here. Besides this, one cannot honestly satisfy the great without injuring others, but one can well do that with the people. Now this is D'Alvarez has a note here, and he points on the nature of the people and that of the many. He points to discourses throughout several sections of it, but particularly discourse 2, book 2, chapter 27 and 30, book 3, chapter 6, 12, 19 through 23, 28 to 31, and 34. So and especially you compare this to book 1, chapter 11, and book 3, chapter 8 in this note. So he has a very specific. D'Alvarez has a very specific aspects of comparison here about this. Machiavelli himself has this. So therefore, the note kind of points you to the way Machiavelli himself will kind of make a point about this, that the people have, in other words, the great want you to do things, and they want to, and this usually is going to harm people to do these things. Okay, you're going to have to cause injuries to others. But one can well do that with the people. In other words, you can satisfy the people because they just want to be left alone. Okay, remember that. For the end of the people is more honest than that of the great. The latter wanting to oppress, the former not to be oppressed. Period. Moreover, with the people as enemies, a prince is never able to assure himself of them, because they are many. Period. In other words, if the people are your enemies, you can never be safe with them, because there are many of them. There's going to be many people who can act against you. And continued. Let's continue here. And he is able to assure himself, of the great, because they are few. Okay. In other words, the people are many, the great are few. Now this is going to be a very interesting point. The worst that a prince can expect from the people who are his enemies is to be abandoned by them. Semicolon. With the great as his enemies, he must not only fear being abandoned, he must also fear their coming against him. For they have more foresight, are more astute, and always take steps to save themselves in time, and they seek the gratitude of the one they hope might win. The great will always turn to the one who wins. They're always looking at their own advantage. They're always looking at the great have foresight. They can see and they understand the situation, and they know who's going to win, and they're going to side with the ones who are going to win. They're not going to side with you just because of that. If they don't think you're going to win, they're going to go against you. They're also, because they think of you, they're equals. They will turn against you. When they turn against you, they have these dangerous people. The people are not as dangerous in that sense. It's hard to escape them because there are many, but the few you can, because the many, because they're few. So from the point of view of how big of a thing you have to deal with, dealing with the people is a much more problematic thing because of the numerous. You can't escape them, but you can escape the few. You can handle the few in that sense. The danger is that the how can I say, the few are what he says. Let's repeat that line. The worst you expect from the people is to be abandoned by them. Okay, that's the worst they'll do to you. Where with the great, you must fear them not only being abandoned, but also them coming against you. He says, for they, again, repeat, they have more foresight, are more astute, right, and are always taking steps to save themselves in time, and they seek the gratitude that they hope they can win. Next sentence. The prince is also necessitated to always live with the same people, but he can very well do without the same great ones, semicolon, because he can make and unmake them every day and take away and give at his disposal their reputation. Now, this is a shocking statement. In other words, this is something I've been reading this because this is Academic Agent's new book, The Populist Delusion. It's a good book. He's talking about the Italian school and this stuff. But here's the point. He wants to talk. He's always going about the elite, but he doesn't understand the problem with the elites. They can be gotten rid of. Okay, this is the thing that This is the point that yes, any system, by the largest of the system, the Italian school will teach us, Pareto, Moscow, and Michaels. The largeness of any social political mechanism of a large scale will always have to have elites for it to function effectively. Elites cannot be, in other words, you cannot get away from elites. So in this sense, he's right. This idea that the people are going to govern everything by anarchy and that kind of, and anyone who talks about anarchy, the anarchy's cool, are morons. You think, anarchy, everyone's going to be around here in anarchy. No, I'm sorry. Any situation of, and this is why Robert Michaels is very important here, because Michael was a socialist. He says, and he looked at socialist activities and realized that no, in any socialist activity, it's always going to be a hierarchy. Given the size of a complex situation, it's going to be a hierarchy. Now think of this. Just do the math. Just think of it yourself. Imagine a group of 1,000 or 2,000 people, and imagine them having each one of them having, let's say, 2,000 people, right? And then each one of them having, you're going to give them 15 minutes to talk. Okay, not even 15. Let's say 10. That's 20,000 minutes. So let's do the division. What is that? That's 60. That's 333.33 hours. So let's divide that by 24. That's 13.8 days. Let's think about that. If all 20,000 people, that's all 2,000 people having 10 minutes. Oh, but they're not going to use just 10 minutes to talk or to make their input. And everyone is inputting. You want to have everyone input. Nothing would get done. So therefore, what happens is you get a situation that not everyone really participates. Maybe in a 2,000 group, in any reality of a 2,000 group situation, reality is no more than 10 to 15% of any group will participate. So you have 15% of times 2,000 people, right? That's going to be, 300. Okay, that's 300. That's pretty big still. That was what, and give every one of them 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And that's not even going to be 4,500 minutes. Divide by 60, 75 hours. That's still a long time. So no, that's not going to be working. So therefore, what's going to happen is it's not going to be even 15%. It's going to be even smaller. That's the reality of that, right? So therefore, it's going to be the top 5%. I just know this. This is going to be top 5%. And you have the situation of 2,000, and that's 100 people. That's even too big. So it's even under 5%. Usually in a group of 2,000, you get about 35, 40 people that would stand up and actively take lead, want to. Most people are apathetic. And in other words, if it really concerned them, the idea is if they really, that's why most people don't vote, most people don't do anything, because most people just want to be left alone. As long as it's not affecting them and they're not being harmed, they're not really caring that much. So therefore, only those who care. So there is this. So therefore, this is the distinction between the many and the great. Those who have an ambition, they have a sense of some interest or some care in the situation, and hence they will demand to participate. So in many ways, elites emerge by the nature of the structure itself and do this. And this is where Machiavelli is making a very useful point, and that is, in other words, a prince. You can't escape the people. The elites, because they're few, you can make and unmake them. Now, this is Lenin's. Lenin understood this very well. That's why French revolutionaries understood this well. If you want to, you can easily, because if the great become hated by the people will join in when you wish to eliminate them, exterminate them. In other words, you can eliminate the great. You can make them and unmake them. You can throw them to the people. Particularly the ones, and they'll make you, remember the Morocco Diaco line. The people would love it. Remember how the people loved Segeret because of what he did with Morocco Diaco, because of his cruelty, and he was hated because of his cruelty. Once people hate you, they will enjoy seeing you get it, or they will partake. If you have no power and powerless, and they hate you, they'll take you down. Remember what happened to Gaddafi when the crowds found him? They tore him to shreds. Why? Because he had no power. He was powerless, and they hated him. The people hated him. Okay, he can only, as long as he had power, they couldn't act. But now they have no power, therefore they definitely acted. So, and this is where he understates the dangerous of the many in that sense. What happens if the many, they can abandon them? Being abandoned is dangerous. If you're abandoned, that means no one is, and therefore those who really hate you will get at you. That's what abandonment means. Abandoning means not only being left not cared for, but it means not protected, not helped. And if you don't have enough power to protect yourself, they will tear. Those who hate you, those who despise you, will destroy you. Now he goes. In other words, let's go. In other words, the prince may necessarily live with the same people, but he can do away with this without. He can do very well without the same great ones, because he can make and unmake them every day. He can take away and give at their disposal a reputation. So therefore, he can make them. In other words, the prince can make the great. And this has happened. In the communist world, this is what happened. The communist world created new elites, the nomenklatura. This is what the apparatchiks. The apparatchiks and nomenklatura in the post-Soviet world is the new elites. In fact, most of your upper middle class in Poland today are nothing but children of the apparatchiks, right? These were the party elites. The party took a bunch of peasants and made them bosses in the 1940s, and all of a sudden they were put in charge of things. all these peasants, and they try to reward the peasants, and they punish the bourgeoisie. They thought the bourgeoisie was too threatening. The old bourgeoisie, unless they were, if the bourgeoisie members were good party people, of course they were rewarded, and they got the good prime slots. But the rest of the society, the bourgeoisie, was either exterminated, or if the Nazis or communists didn't exterminate you, the surviving ones, if you were not a good party member, okay, you made it. But if you weren't a good party member, you kind of were punished. You're kind of marginalized. And workers and the peasants were put up before you. And therefore, all of a sudden, all these peasants became the new elites, the new apparatchiks. Okay? The Soviet prince, the party system, the prince of the system made the new elites, and therefore they became the elites. And now in transition, those same set elites are still now the elites now, to a great portion. Okay? So this is the thing about this. One of the mistakes that happened after post-transition was because in the name of liberalism, we have to not punish that much. We can't strip the old communists of their properties and things like that. Nonsense. That needed to be done. In fact, this is the failure of this part of the world was the transition. Okay, in the transition you couldn't do it because if you did it in the transition, the communists would not have given up so easy. See, the communists gave up to a great degree because they got to keep the goodies. The communist apparatchiks in the leadership got to keep all the goodies. And therefore I like democracy. I can be the rich capitalist now. And that's what happened. That's the transition in most of this part of the world. So all therefore, who were the capitalist class? Who are the elites? Well, these are the old commie motherfuckers, okay? They are the old commies and their children and their, friends, okay? And they purposely put their friends in important positions in law and government and to courts to protect them, okay? That's why they kept blackmail information on them, and they knew they had all the dirt on them. So the party leadership can say, "I knew what you did." And if I let this out, that what you did, all the things you've reformed on your friends on, they'll hate you. So you got to play ball, right? That's how they kept control of Wałęsa in that sense. So therefore, this is the way you have to understand what Machiavelli's talking about. You can, the prince can make the great. You can do them, and then you can create them, and that this is the new elite. You can create new elites. In other words, this is the thing. This is why I'm kind of disagreeing a little bit with academic here, because I think he overstates the elites. He thinks the elites are great. He thinks everything's always going to be elite. No. Much of the elites, in other words, are merely placeholders in the system. They're not real elites. This is the point. Who are really the great? The great are very few, and that there's not enough of them. And he's going to get to that point now. Okay, now we have to go next paragraph. So that's the fourth paragraph. In order to clarify this part, I say that one ought to consider the great principally in two modes. They either govern themselves in their proceedings in such a mode that they are wholly obligated to your fortune, or they do not. If the great, they owe everything to you, or they do not. They live their lives and behave as though they owe everything to you, or they owe you nothing. Okay. Those who are so obligated and who are not rapacious ought to be honored and loved. And those who are not obligated to have to be, in other words, and those who are not obligated have to be examined in two modes. In other words, if they're not rapacious and they owe you everything, you can leave. They're yours. Don't worry about them in that sense. You are not obligated to have them examined. In other words, rapacious, you can honor them. In fact, you can honor them. However, if you're going to those who are not those two things, right? Remember, be careful about the rapacious. You don't want the rapacious. You don't want to become hated. You don't want. In other words, they're hated by them. If you honor the people who hated, you'll become hated. So no. So you have to watch out. Don't be careful about the rapacious. The rapacious, rapacious, rape, right? These people would take, who just want so badly they'll just take it, okay? This is the rapacious. This is dangerous. The rapacious become hated. They become despised. So therefore, they're being despised. If you honor them, then you become despised. And that's why Caesarea had to remove Diorca, because he was hated. If he didn't remove Diorca and honored Diorca, what would have happened? The hatred would have transferred to him. That's why Diorca had to be killed, and the way Caesarea killed him. In that chapter back ago, I think it was on Prince by Fortune. 2 chapters ago, maybe 2 chapters ago. So therefore, this is the important thing here in this sense. We have to understand that you're going to have to avoid that, and if they're wholly dependent upon you and your thing, okay, they're safe, as long as they're not rapacious, okay, and they owe their fortune to you, okay, they can be honored. However, those who are not, well, you have to do it. They need to are not obligated, have to be examined 2 modes. If they keep to themselves from you because of pusillanimously and a natural lack of spirit, then you should have them serve you, especially those who are of good counsel. Because in prosperity they bring you honor, and in adversity you need not fear them. Say, first of all, of these people who don't owe you anything, they're not obligated to you, if they have their pusillanimity, this is one of these words, pusillanimity, smallness of soul. If their souls or their characters are little small people, and they're not spirited, they a natural lack of spirit. Now, there's a footnote here. Amino, the word is animal. We uses the word animal, spirit. Now, what happens here? This is the thing. If they have no spirit, they have very little spirit, then what happens? Well, you just pages and pusillanimity, natural lack of, this is page 58, last sentence. Then you should have them serve you. They're like that small skull, they're not a fret. If they have good counsel, in other words, if they're morons, you don't just leave them alone. But if they're pretty bright people and they're good at what they do, use them. Because why? They'll bring benefit. But when times are when things are good, they will bring prosperity. They'll bring you honor. Because in prosperity they bring you honor, and adversary, they're little shits. They're powerless. You don't need to fear them. They're small-souled people are not. They may talk big, but they won't. They'll shit themselves. They'll piss their pants. They're cowards in that sense. They'll act. They won't act. They don't have spirit. You need Machiavelli said you need animation. Do you have to have willingness to go defend yourself? You want to kill the motherfucker, okay? Where they would, oh no, I'll forgive him. I'll let him go. That's what I mean. This is the animus of, the animal aspect of us sometimes. That Machiavelli is saying that, listen, the lack of spirit. There's something lacking in their spirit. So therefore, you don't honor them because they bring you and honor them. If they are smart, use them, take their advice, because at best they bring you. If things go well, they bring you prosperity, and if in adversity, they're not going to act against you. You don't have to fear them. Okay, but if they do not if they do not obligate themselves out of art and ambition, and because of ambition, it is a sign they are thinking more of themselves than of you. And it is these whom a prince should always watch and fear, as if they were discovered enemies, because they will always, in adversary, help to ruin the prince, him. Help to ruin you. They use the word him. In other words, the prince, the civic prince. Why? Because why? These people, if they're doing it, they're not going to be coming to you, and they don't owe you anything, but they're doing this not because of what he's saying, that they're. It is a sign, in other words, but if they do not obligate themselves out of art, and because of ambition, in other words, they kind of some kind of activity to kind of action or things. They do this purposefully to avoid serving you or doing things. They do it out of an art, like they make themselves, in other words, look foolish. You know that they're not foolish, but they act like they're foolish. They act that they're useless. Okay, but you know they're not useless. The famous example is the Brutus in the First Republic. You know, the first Brutus was he played the clown. He did the clown because if he wasn't a clown, he would have been killed. So therefore, he uses art to mask himself. Now you have to be good. You have to distinguish between those who are engaging in whose stupidity is real, versus whose stupidity or foolishness or uselessness is an art, a kind of dress to mask the reality. So therefore, there's two reasons. They don't want to be. They're not obligated to you, and they don't want to serve you, and they really they do so with art to mask them, or they have ambition. They want your job, now it may not be that they want it, but in a crisis they might take that opportunity. Okay, so what? They're always an opportunity. They will help to ruin him, the prince. Now the next. Sixth. I might have been wrong. Hold on. I apologize. I have to check something. No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I gotta check something. Something's fishy here. Okay, 60. Please forgive me. Hold on. Four, yeah. 5, 6. Okay, yeah, I was right. It just looked funny. I lost track of the place. Now, in the fifth paragraph on page 59, one who becomes prince by means of the favor of the people ought, therefore, to keep them his friends. This is made easy for him if they ask him only that they not be oppressed. Next sentence. That's first sentence. Easy to do it by press. Second sentence. Third sentence. But one who becomes prince with the favor of the great against the people ought above all things to gain the people for himself. Semicolon. Which is easily done when he undertakes their protection. Period. And since men when good comes from one whom they believe they will have evil, are more obliged to their benefactor. The people are then immediately more well disposed to him than if he had been conducted to the Principate by their own favor. Now, this is something you have to remember. Remember the earlier thing in we talked about in Fortune. We talked about the mistake of regarding great, thinking that if you harm them, they will forgive you, or you make them, you put them in, you give the great, you took someone you've harmed, or they don't like you, they fear you, and you put them high. They will always act against you. The great will do that. The people, for the most part, what? Well, if they've expected you to be bad, but then don't turn bad and actually benefit them, they're surprised, and they're like, "Oh my God!" And they in other words, this actually does explain why someone like Donald Trump is so popular with working class people, because they want to, and many people expect the rich and the powerful not to respect them, not to like them, not to be their friend, not to show respect and show things, but have contempt for them. But Trump is actually pretty good with normal people, more than a lot of people would expect. So therefore, this explains why someone who's big, who can show that he has, he doesn't look down upon people, he doesn't look down upon the many. This can actually be a very powerful thing here. So therefore, this is the thing about this. And therefore, in other words, therefore, this is what the thing. The great are going to want the people to act. The great want him to act against the people. Act the prince. The great, when they put the prince in power. The people, when they put the prince in power, mostly want to be left alone. So if the people just only want to be left alone, the prince can easily do that. But the great, when they put him in power, want usually him to do things for them, and usually at the expense of the people. And at that moment, what the prince should do, he says, make the people their friend. Make the people their friend. Betray the great. Betray the great. Betray him. Because why? But wait a minute. But the people are going to expect you to be their enemy, because those guys put you in power. Well, but then this is what he says. First of all, they're dangerous. For the most part, the great are dangerous. They're a threat to you. The people are not, for the most part. And you can win them over simply by betraying the great. This is what he says here. In other words, he says, and since, like I said, this again, and since this is that middle, and since men, when good comes from one who they believe they will have evil, are more obliged to their benefactor. The people are immediately more well disposed to him than if he had been conducted to the Principate by their own favor. More than those. In other words, the funny thing is, this is the point, that they're more obligated. In other words, if they made him think that, okay, that would be love him, but the fact that they were expecting him to be on their enemy, but now it turns out that he's their friend, they love him more. And that's what he says here. That's an interesting point here. Now, a question is it really true? He doesn't really deny it, and doesn't give it, but let's look at this. It says, and princes may gain the people in many modes, because these modes vary according to the subject. A certain rule cannot be given, and therefore it will be omitted. In other words, he can't give a rule. In other words, this is interesting. And many things he's given a general rule. Here doesn't have a rule. Because why? It depends on the subject. It depends on, a prince may gain the people, in many modes. But because these modes will vary according to the subject or the people in question, a general rule cannot be applied. So therefore, he's not going to give one. He's going to be quiet about it. It can be done many ways, but it depends on the kind of people you're dealing with, the people and what they want, and how they're doing it. In other words, I shall conclude. This is the sixth paragraph. I shall conclude only that it is necessary for a prince to have the people friendly. Otherwise, an adversary, he does not have a remedy. Nabis, the prince of the Spartans, sustained the siege of the whole of Greece, and one of the most victorious of Roman armies, and defended his patria, fatherland, and his state against them. When the danger appeared, one thing alone sufficed him, that he assured himself of the few. If he had the people as his enemy, this would not have been enough. And let no one contradict my opinion with that trite proverb that he who founds on the people founds on mud, semicolon. For it is true that if a private citizen lays his foundation there and gives himself to understand that the people will rescue him if he's oppressed by enemies or by the magistrates, in this case one could often find himself deceived, as were the Gracchi in Rome, in Messa Giorgio Scarsi in Florence. In other words, if you're a common person, you're a private citizen, you might think the people will defend you. Okay, they'll defend you. Now, the Gracchi thought the people would defend them. It didn't. Gracchi were killed by the senatorial people and their private thugs, and the people did not able to help them in that sense. And the same thing with Mr. Giorgio Scarsi. Now, this is the Footnotes 5 and 6, right? He says, the Gracchi, Tiberius, and Gaius Semterus sought to reform the Roman constitution by increasing popular and knightly power against the senatorial nobility. Tiberius was murdered by a senatorial gang in 133 BC. Gaius had one of his slaves kill him in 121 to avoid being taken by his enemies. The Gracchi, according to Machiavelli, were imprudent in seeking radically to restore the republican way when evil ways had become habitual. Again, see Discourses, Book 1, Chapter 37. Okay, now, the example of Giorgio Scali was one of the heads of the popular rebellion in Florence, which was called the Tumult of Campi, 1378. The Campi were unincorporated laborers in the wool industry and formed the most numerous and most powerful of the minor arts, that is, of the trades which employed the lowest of peoples, the plebeians, as Machiavelli called them. The popular government was established, and the oligarchic property of the Guelphs were either oppressed or exiled. Scarvi, together with some others, proved, however, to be too democratic or plebeian even for the popular government, and he was beheaded. Now, this is, and he says, the Alvarez says, sees the Florentine Histories, Book 3, chapters 1 to 20, especially chapter chapter 20, chapter 3, sections 1 through 20, and see chapter sorry, that's so great. I think it's book 3. I'm correct. Book 3, chapters 1 through 3, and then see chapter 12 below. Okay, that he talks about this case again. Now, why did I mention this? Well, because this is Scarvi says these are two examples of relying on the people, and it doesn't always work. But the argument is that you lie on the people. The proverb is you lie on the people, you lie in mud. He said, don't buy that. I'm going to let no one contradict me with that proverb. He said, no. And even though there's example, but they're private people. They weren't princes when these things happen. But a prince who founds on the people, who is able to command and is a man of heart, is not dismayed in adversity. And if he does not lack other preparation, in other words, yes, he has to have other preparations, and he does not lack other preparations. And if and with his mind and his orders, he animates the whole, he will never find them deceived by others. So therefore, this is that key line. In other words, he's not going to be deceived by others. If his mind is sharp and he has preparations, therefore, it's not going to be deceived in that sense. Never himself deceived by them, the people. He'll never find himself deceived by them, the people. And he will see that he has laid for himself a good foundation. Here ends the 6th paragraph. In other words, In other words, he won't be deceived by them. He knows their strength. He will know when they will hold not with it, and he can force them. Remember, he has the ability to command, and if he uses his command, he can force them to believe. Okay, in other words, he can compel them in that certain level to believe, and that's if he knows, if he's doing if he's acting right, if he's engaged in his function as a ruler properly. He's going to motivate them and make them believe again. They believe in what he stands for and what he's doing and the benefit that he's given them. Okay, so therefore that's a thing that he does. In other words, he can from the status as a prince, as the prince, he can see the people, assess them, and shape them. In other words, you need what? He says you need to do what? Preparations. You need to do not lack another preparation. So you got to make sure things are done right, so that when the time bad comes, you can compel the people, force them to believe still, and make it seem inevitable that that staying with you would be the best bet. Now we get to our 7th paragraph, and this is the last. Usually these principates are put in danger when they are in transition from a civil order to an absolute one. In other words, it's that moment when they go from a civil one, or still restrained by the people, to an absolute one. That is when the prince alone is in charge, and no longer just elected and like this. For such princes either take command themselves or appoint magistrates. In the latter case, their place is weaker and more dangerous because they are wholly dependent upon the will of those citizens who are appointed magistrates. For these, especially in adverse time, can with great felicity take away the state, either by opposition or disobedience. In other words, therefore, if you're going to appoint magistrates and appoint people to these positions, the danger here is what happens to these people is you appointed magistrates. You appointed magistrates, and they're appointed, they have autonomy. A civic magistrate, if it's personal there, you can take it out. But if the magistrate is of civic origin, once in there, they might have some time in it. You can't maybe replace them. They might have a kind of like a longevity, a certain kind of time in office, and that the prince may not be able to. The civic prince may not be able to remove them. They have that time in office, okay? And then they can stay in that time of office, and they have to go through some process. Maybe they have to go through some process of going to a court or doing something. In other words, there might be rules that limit the prince's power in a civic principate. It's when you're in the absolute one, where you're in charge and everything you want happens. These are the two things. The civic order is still one where the laws and the rules. Here, the civic order, now he says, no, the civic order is the one where there is liberty, okay? Liberty is implied above and is founded in the city. So therefore, that's the Alvarez note here. That the civic order is one where there's freedom involved. So if you're going to go from that moment where it's still the civic system to one is there, then there's a problem. The people who are appointed to the magistrates, these, if they're they, in time of crisis or time of change, might turn on you, might do something. Because they are wholly dependent on the will of the citizens who are appointed magistrates. For these, especially in adverse time, can with great facility take away the state, either by opposition or disobedience. Period. Next sentence. And a prince cannot, in the midst of danger, take absolute authority in time, because the citizens and subjects who usually obey the magistrate are not, in the shoals, going to obey him. In other words, in the shoal is the short waters, the wild and short waters. In other words, in the crisis, the waters are like the shoal, and it's very easy. Things can overthrow, and they're kind of like. And they're not going to simply obey. They're going to say, "Well, what's going on?" Right? And these dubious times. In other words, he goes, In other words, you can't simply just, in the time of crisis, in this danger, cannot just a mere say, I'm in charge and everything's my way. Because the citizens and subjects who usually obey the magistrates are not. And this show is going to obey him. Okay? And there will always be, in dubious times, a dearth of those whom he can trust. So in other words, in those serious times, you may not have enough people you can trust. For such a prince cannot found himself on what he sees in quiet times. You have to understand, in crisis, what you see in normal times is not what happens in crisis. These are two different realities. And what is true in one is not necessarily going to be true in the other. Okay? You have to understand this in that sense. So, in other words, for a prince cannot found himself, in other words, if a prince cannot found himself on what he sees in quiet times, then the citizens have need of, when citizens have need of the state. For then everyone runs, everyone promises, everyone wants to die for him when death is far off. But in adverse times, when the state has need of citizens, then few of them are to be found. In other words, okay, this is that famous line. This is the problem. When everything's far off, of course, everyone runs, everyone promises, everyone wants to die for you. But then when you have to go die, no, it's going to come forward. This is that famous scene in the movie High Noon, right? High Noon, when the sheriff is being a bad guy is coming to town. The gang is going to kill him, and there's a gang of guys going to kill him. And he tries to get the citizens to do a posse to stop the gang, and they won't. No, in other words, they just won't willing to do it. And no one is willing to do it. They abandon him. They abandon him in that sense. They abandon him in that moment. And this is what is, again, that's an example of this. This is what he says. You have, in a crisis, you can't rely on them. And so much the more is this experience dangerous, since one cannot have it more than once. In other words, you can't do it more than once. You can't do this thing, transition from one to the other more than once. Therefore, a wise prince ought to think of a mode whereby the citizens, always and in every quality of time, have need of the state and of him, and that they will always be faithful. In other words, they need you. They need you desperately. They will always need you. You gotta make them a wholly needing on you, because if they need you, they will support you. In other words, if they're benefiting, you're making it clear that without you, they are fucked. They'll always be yours. So therefore, the wise prince needs to make the people wholly see them that way. If they don't see them that way, then what happens is that when the crisis comes, they're not going to volunteer then. Okay, this is where we end the chapter. We're longer than I normally like. We're at the end. If you have any comments or questions, please put them below. If you've liked this, hit the like button and share it with a friend. Okay. If you like see more of this, please subscribe. You can also, if you want to ask me a question or something that's not a thing, you can follow me on social media links that are again below. Again, see you again. This is Clifford Bates, and we'll be soon and next time doing the next chapter, which will be chapter 10. Okay, take care. Bye bye.